What would you do if you caught your husband with another woman and she was wearing your dead mother's necklace? What would you do if that same husband then called security to drag you out of his building while you were 4 months pregnant with twins? What would you do if he used his billions to take
Please,
your home,
I'm innocent.
your reputation, and then
I
tried
didn't
to
do
steal your
anything. You
newborn
have to
daughter
believe
right
me.
from your hospital bed? Most women
She's
would
the
break.
one. She did
Elena
it.
Mercer
She
did
pushed
not
her.
break. She got even. This is not a story about a victim. This is a story about a woman who lost everything and then took back 10 times more. A woman who discovered that her billionaire husband built his entire empire on patents he stole from her dying father. A woman who uncovered a murder that had been hidden for 12 years. A woman who walked into a courtroom with nothing but the truth and walked out with $400 million and her daughter in her arms. But here is what makes this story different from every revenge fantasy you have ever heard. The real victory was not the money. It was not watching her enemies go to prison. It was not even the moment she walked past her ex-husband like he was a stranger. The real victory was freedom. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly what that means. If you have ever been underestimated, betrayed, or told you were not strong enough, this story is for you. If you have ever wondered whether justice actually exists for people like us, keep listening. Because Elena Mercer is about to show you what happens when a woman decides she has nothing left to lose. Stay until the end. Trust me, the moment she walks past him in that hospital lobby will give you chills. And if this story moves you, if it makes you feel something, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Now let us begin. Christmas Eve had always been Elena Mercer's favorite day of the year. But this particular Christmas Eve, as she walked through the hospital lobby with her newborn daughter cradled against her chest, she felt something she had not experienced in over a year. She felt free. The lobby sparkled with holiday decorations. Volunteers hummed carols near a towering Christmas tree. Nurses exchanged gifts at the reception desk. And Elena moved through it all like a woman who had walked through fire and emerged holding diamonds. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that cost more than her old apartment's monthly rent. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Her daughter, wrapped in a pale pink blanket, slept peacefully against her heartbeat. And when Elena smiled, it was the smile of a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. That was when she saw him. Daniel Cross stood frozen near the entrance, a $5,000 coat hanging perfectly on his shoulders, his hand suspended mid-reach toward his phone. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Or perhaps, Elena thought with quiet satisfaction, a man who had just realized ghosts could haunt the living. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. She simply walked past him as if he were a stranger, which, in every way that mattered, he now was. A handsome man with warm brown eyes appeared at her side. Marcus Reed took her arm gently, his presence solid and reassuring. Together, they walked toward the exit, toward the snow falling softly outside, toward a future that Daniel Cross would never be part of. Behind her, Elena heard a nurse whisper to a colleague, "That is Elena Mercer. She just donated the entire new pediatric wing." Named it after her father. Elena did not look back. She had spent too many years looking back. Now she only looked forward. But Daniel Cross remained frozen in that lobby, watching the automatic doors close behind the woman he had once promised to love and protect. The woman he had betrayed. The woman he had tried to destroy. The woman who had destroyed him instead. 8 months earlier, Elena Mercer had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse. In fact, she thought she was living her happiest moment. The penthouse glittered with fairy lights and champagne flutes. 200 guests mingled in designer clothes, celebrating the 5th wedding anniversary of Daniel and Elena Cross. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over faces that smiled too perfectly, conversations that meant nothing, and a marriage that was already rotting from the inside. Elena stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand resting on her stomach, her heart racing with a secret she had discovered just that morning. She was pregnant. After 3 years of trying, of disappointment, of quiet tears in bathroom stalls, she was finally going to be a mother. She had wanted to tell Daniel privately, but he had been in meetings all day. Now, surrounded by their guests, watching him shake hands with investors and flash his magazine cover smile, she decided this was the perfect moment. their anniversary, their miracle. She clinked a fork against her champagne glass, which was filled with sparkling water, though no one had noticed. The room gradually quieted. Daniel turned toward her, his expression shifting from practiced charm to something more guarded. "Everyone," Elena said, her voice warm but trembling slightly, "I have an announcement. After 5 wonderful years with this man, I finally have news I have been waiting to share." She looked at Daniel, expecting joy, expecting the moment she had dreamed about since their wedding day. "We are going to have a baby." The room erupted in applause. Guests rushed forward with congratulations, but Elena kept her eyes on her husband, waiting for his reaction. Daniel smiled, but it was not the smile of a happy father. It was the smile of a man whose plans had just been interrupted. He crossed the room and kissed her cheek for the cameras, but his whisper was cold against her ear. "We need to talk. Now." He led her away from the crowd, down a hallway into his private study. The moment the door closed, his mask fell away. "We discussed this, Elena." "Not yet. The IPO is in 3 months. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Elena stared at him. "Discussed? You mean you decided?" "I just found out this morning, Daniel. I thought you would be happy. I thought this was what we both wanted." Daniel ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I said not yet. I said after the IPO. Why can you never listen?" Something cracked inside Elena, a tiny fissure in the foundation of everything she had believed about her marriage. But she pushed it aside. She made excuses. He was stressed. The company was everything to him. He would come around. He always came around, did he not? "We will talk about this later," Daniel said, already moving toward the door. "Right now, I have investors waiting." He left her standing alone in his study, surrounded by awards and photographs of his success, feeling more invisible than she had ever felt in her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Debbie. "Girl, the way he looked at that stock ticker with more love than you." "I am just saying, you okay?" Elena typed back. "Fine, just tired. Talk tomorrow." But she was not fine. And somewhere deep inside, in a place she was not ready to acknowledge, she knew that this was only the beginning. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully beside her, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling. She replayed his reaction, his cold eyes, his dismissive tone. She thought about all the times she had made excuses for him, all the times she had convinced herself that his ambition was not cruelty, just focus. She placed a hand on her stomach, on the tiny life growing inside her. "I will love you enough for both of us," she whispered. "I promise." It was a promise she would keep, but not in any way she could have imagined. 2 weeks later, Elena discovered she was having twins. The ultrasound showed 2 heartbeats, 2 tiny forms floating in perfect symmetry. She cried with joy in the examination room, already imagining matching cribs, matching outfits, a house full of laughter and chaos and love. She did not tell Daniel over text. She wanted to see his face. She wanted to believe that twins would somehow break through his walls, that more would mean more love. She drove to his office downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and ambition that bore his name in steel letters. She had helped connect him with the architect who designed it. She had stood beside him at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She had believed she was a partner in his success. The receptionist smiled and waved her through. "Mrs. Cross, how lovely to see you." Elena took the private elevator to the top floor, rehearsing her speech, imagining his arms around her. She opened his office door without knocking. After 5 years, she had never thought she needed to. What she saw destroyed every illusion she had ever held about her marriage. Victoria Ashford sat on Daniel's desk, her long legs crossed, her red lips curved in a smile that held no surprise at Elena's entrance. In fact, she looked as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. But what made Elena's heart stop was not the woman's position, or Daniel's guilty freeze, or even the obvious intimacy between them. It was the necklace around Victoria's throat, a delicate gold chain with a small sapphire pendant. Elena's mother's necklace. The only thing she had left of the woman who raised her alone, working 3 jobs, dying of cancer when Elena was 19. The necklace Elena had reported missing 2 months ago. The necklace Daniel had promised to help her find. Victoria touched the pendant, her smile widening. Oh, honey, he gave this to me months ago, said you would never notice. And look, he was almost right. Elena could not speak, could not move. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, someone watching from very far away. Daniel's voice cut through the silence. Elena, this is not what it looks like. But his words meant nothing. She was staring at her mother's necklace on another woman's chest, and everything she had believed about her life was unraveling. It is exactly what it looks like, Victoria said, sliding off the desk with the grace of a predator. She moved closer to Elena, close enough that Elena could smell her perfume. We have been together for almost a year. He was going to tell you after the IPO. I suppose I just moved up the timeline. Victoria, Daniel's voice was sharp. That is enough, Victoria shrugged. She deserves to know. Besides, look at her. She cannot even fight back. This will be easier than I thought. Something finally broke through Elena's paralysis. Not rage, not tears, but a strange clarity. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. My mother's necklace, she said quietly. You took my mother's necklace. Daniel's expression flickered. Guilt, yes, but underneath it, impatience. Elena, we can discuss this later. You should not be here. You are not supposed to be here. I came to tell you, Elena heard herself say. We are having twins. Silence. Victoria's smirk faltered. Daniel went pale. Twins, Elena repeated. But I can see now, that does not matter to you. Nothing matters to you except this. She gestured around the office, at the empire he had built. But Daniel, everything you built was supposed to include me. I thought I was your partner. You were never my partner. Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. You were his placeholder, the nurse he married before he became someone. You never fit in his world. Everyone knows it. You just refuse to see it. Daniel did not correct her. He did not defend Elena. He simply stood there, adjusting his cufflinks, as if this entire scene was an inconvenience in his schedule. I want you to leave, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Both of you, I'm going home to pack my things. Daniel almost laughed. Leave? Elena, you are not going anywhere, and you are certainly not taking anything. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Security, please come to my office. Elena stared at him. What are you doing? I'm protecting my assets, Daniel said coolly. Everything in that penthouse belongs to me. Your name is not on anything. And given your current emotional state, I think it is best if professionals help you exit the building. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Elena knew them both. She had brought them homemade cookies last Christmas. Mrs. Cross, one of them said, looking uncomfortable, we need to escort you out. Elena's legs moved automatically. Down the hallway, into the elevator, through the lobby, past the receptionist who refused to meet her eyes. Outside, someone was filming with their phone. By the time Elena reached her car, she was shaking so violently she could barely grip the keys. Her phone buzzed. Debbie, Elena answered, her voice breaking. He was with someone else. He gave her my mother's necklace, and he had security remove me from the building. Debbie's response was immediate. Where are you? I am coming right now. In my car, in the parking garage. Do not move. Do not drive. I will be there in 15 minutes. Elena sat in her car, one hand on her stomach, tears streaming down her face. She was pregnant with twins. She had no money in her name. And the man she had trusted with her life had just revealed himself to be a monster. Her phone buzzed again, a news alert. She opened it automatically. Crosstech CEO's wife escorted from building an emotional breakdown. There was already footage, comments calling her crazy, desperate, pathetic, speculation about substance abuse, mental illness, gold digging. In that moment, Elena understood something with terrible clarity. Daniel had not just betrayed her. He had planned this, and she had walked directly into his trap. 2 weeks later, Elena sat across from her lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who had been recommended by a friend of a friend. I have good news, Patricia said. California is a community property state. You are entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. And with the proof of infidelity, cheating text messages, we have a strong case. Elena allowed herself one small breath of hope, the first in 14 days. What about custody? She asked. Patricia nodded. Given his affair and his treatment of you, any reasonable judge will grant you primary custody. He might get visitation, but Elena, you have the moral high ground here. When can we file? I already have the paperwork ready. We file tomorrow. That night, Elena slept almost peacefully for the first time since the discovery. She was staying with Debbie in her small apartment, but she did not mind. She had survived worse. Her mother had raised her alone on a nurse's salary. Elena knew how to be strong. But the next morning, everything changed. Patricia called at 7 in the morning, her voice strained. Elena, we have a problem. Daniel's lawyers just sent over a document, a postnuptial agreement, signed by you 3 years ago. Elena's blood went cold. What are you talking about? Do you remember signing anything back then? There was some kind of business crisis, right? The memory surfaced slowly. Daniel, stressed and exhausted, pushing papers across the breakfast table. Just a formality, sweetheart, to protect the company in case anything ever happens. My lawyers insist. You trust me, right? She had trusted him. She had not read carefully. She had signed. What does it say? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. In the event of divorce, you receive nothing. The penthouse, the cars, all joint accounts, even your personal savings that you contributed to, it is all in his name. According to this document, you agreed to waive all claims. That cannot be legal. He tricked me. We can fight it, Patricia said. But Elena, it will take years, and there is more. Elena gripped the phone. More? His lawyers are filing for full custody of the babies. They have submitted documentation claiming you are mentally unstable, therapy notes indicating emotional volatility, paranoid tendencies. Elena felt sick. I have never seen a therapist through his connections. I do not even know what notes they could have. They claim your former therapist provided them. Someone named Dr. Helen Marsh, Elena remembered her, a therapist Daniel had recommended 3 years ago when Elena was struggling with fertility issues. She had only gone a few times before deciding the woman was cold and unhelpful. She doctored the notes, Elena said. She has to have. I never said any of those things. We will fight this, Patricia repeated. But you need to prepare yourself. This is going to be harder than we thought. Elena hung up and sat in silence. She was 4 months pregnant with twins. She had $312 in her checking account. Her husband had just accused her of being mentally unfit to raise her own children. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Cross was probably smiling. Debbie found her sitting on the floor of the bathroom, not crying, just staring at the wall. Hey, Debbie said softly, sliding down beside her. Whatever happened, we will figure it out. He planned this, Elena said. For years, he had me sign that agreement when I was most vulnerable. He had that therapist write fake notes. He had his mistress waiting in the wings, and I never saw any of it coming. Debbie took her hand. That is because you are a good person who expects other people to be good too. That is not a weakness, Elena. That is just hope, and hope is what is going to get you through this. Elena looked at her friend. How? How am I supposed to fight a billionaire with no money and no resources and twin babies growing inside me? Debbie squeezed her hand. One day at a time. And you are not alone. You have me. You have people who love you, and Elena, you have something he does not have. What is that? Nothing left to lose. Elena returned to work at St. Mary's Hospital 3 days after the custody filing. She needed money, and nursing was all she knew. The familiar rhythms of the ward steadied her. Temperature checks, medication rounds, comforting worried parents. Here, she was not Daniel Cross's discarded wife. She was Nurse Mercer, and she was good at her job. For almost 3 weeks, she found a fragile equilibrium. She rented a room in Debbie's apartment. She saved every penny. She met with Patricia weekly to discuss strategy. She felt, for brief moments, almost hopeful. Then the first catastrophe struck. She arrived for her shift on a Tuesday morning and was immediately called into the administrator's office. Her supervisor was there, along with two people from Human Resources and a woman Elena did not recognize. Mrs. Cross, the administrator began, we have received a complaint from the state nursing board. Pending a mental health evaluation, your license has been temporarily suspended. Elena felt the room tilt. Suspended? On what grounds? The administrator slid a document across the desk. Concerns about your psychological fitness to provide patient care. The complaint includes documentation from your former therapist. The fake notes, Margaret Cross's weapon, wielded from a distance. This is not true, Elena said, her voice shaking. Those therapy notes are fabricated. My husband's family is trying to destroy me. The HR representative exchanged glances with the others. Mrs. Cross, we understand you are going through a difficult time, but until the board completes its review, you cannot work in a patient care capacity. I am sorry. Lena walked out of the hospital in a daze. 5 years of perfect performance reviews. 5 years of patients requesting her specifically. 5 years of dedication, erased by a single forged document. She called Patricia from the parking lot. They suspended my license, she said. I cannot work. I have no income. We will add this to the lawsuit, Patricia said. This is retaliation. But Elena, fighting the nursing board could take months. I do not have months, Elena replied. I am 5 months pregnant with no job and a billionaire trying to take my children. That night, Debbie came home with Chinese takeout in a determined expression. Okay, she said, unpacking containers. Here is what we are going to do. I have some savings. It is not much, but it will cover rent for the next few months. You focus on the legal stuff. We will get through this. Elena started crying. I cannot take your money, Debbie. It is not a loan. It is what friends do. Debbie handed her chopsticks. Besides, when you win this case and get your millions, you can buy me a really nice car. Despite everything, Elena laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks, but the second catastrophe arrived the next morning. A notice taped to Debbie's apartment door. Eviction. The building had been sold, and all tenants had 30 days to vacate. What? Debbie said, staring at the paper. I have lived here for 6 years. They cannot just evict everyone. Elena felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. She pulled out her phone and searched the property records. The building had been purchased 1 week ago by a shell company whose parent corporation she recognized. Daniel bought the building, Elena said quietly. Debbie's face went through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, then pure rage. He bought my building to kick you out? He bought your building to kick us both out, Elena said. He is not just punishing me. He is punishing anyone who helps me. They spent the day calling every apartment listing they could find. Nothing available in their price range. Nothing that would accept someone without proof of employment. Nothing that was not already taken. That night, Elena lay awake in the dark, one hand on her stomach, feeling the twins move. She whispered to them, I am going to fix this. I do not know how yet, but I am going to fix this. I promise. At 3 in the morning, she woke to a sharp pain in her abdomen. Something was wrong. The ambulance ride blurred together with fluorescent lights and urgent voices. She remembered the paramedic holding her hand. She remembered asking about the babies. She remembered the look on his face. At the hospital, a doctor she did not know appeared at her bedside. Dr. Caroline Webb, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, kind eyes that held too much knowledge. Elena, Dr. Webb said gently, I need to tell you something. The babies, Elena said. Please, please tell me they are okay. Dr. Webb took her hand. We were able to save one of them. A little girl. She is strong, Elena. She is going to be fine. One of them. The words did not make sense. Elena had heard 2 heartbeats just last week, but then 2 heartbeats. 2 babies. The other one, Elena started, but she could not finish. I am so sorry, Dr. Webb said. There was nothing we could do. The stress on your body, the complications. We tried everything. Elena stared at the ceiling. She could not cry. She could not speak. She could not feel anything at all. Somewhere in the distance, she heard Dr. Webb say, You need to rest now. We will take care of you. But Elena was not really there. She was somewhere else entirely, in a dark place where grief had no words and hope had no meaning. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window. For one brief moment, she forgot everything. Then memory returned like a wave, and she was drowning all over again. A man in a suit stood at the foot of her bed. She did not recognize him. "Mrs. Cross," he said, his voice professionally neutral, "I represent your husband's legal team. Given your recent medical episode and the ongoing custody dispute, Mr. Cross is prepared to offer a settlement." Elena said nothing. $50,000, the man continued, "and you sign over all parental rights to the remaining child. You will have no contact, no visitation. It will be a clean break. Get out. I understand you are emotional right now, but I would encourage you to consider—" "Get out," Elena said again louder, "and you can tell Daniel that I will die before I sign away my daughter." The lawyer's expression flickered. "Mrs. Cross, given your current circumstances, fighting this in court could take years. Years you do not have the resources for." Dr. Webb appeared in the doorway. "Is there a problem here?" The lawyer straightened his tie. "No problem at all. I was just leaving." He paused at the door. "The offer expires in 72 hours, Mrs. Cross. I hope you will reconsider." When he was gone, Dr. Webb crossed to Elena's bedside. "I overheard some of that," she said. "I am sorry. I should have gotten here sooner." "It does not matter." Elena's voice was hollow. "He will find another way. He always finds another way." Dr. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down. "Let me tell you something, Elena. I have been divorced 3 times. My first husband was a surgeon who tried to destroy my career when I left him. He called the medical board with false complaints. He spread rumors. He did everything he could to break me." "What happened?" Elena asked. Not because she cared, but because it was easier than silence. "I won," Dr. Webb said simply. "It took 5 years, but I won. And now I am chief of obstetrics at the largest hospital in the city, and he is retired and bitter and alone." She paused. "The point is, men like your husband think they are untouchable, but their arrogance is their weakness. And you, Elena, you have something he does not." "Everyone keeps saying that," Elena said, "but I do not see it." "You are a witness, Dr. Thorne," Webb said. "You just do not know yet to what." 3 days later, Elena was discharged from the hospital. She had nowhere to go. Debbie was staying with her sister while looking for a new apartment. Patricia's retainer was due, and Elena could not pay it. She sat in the hospital cafeteria, nursing a cup of cold coffee, trying to figure out her next move. That was when Marcus Reed found her. He was tall, with warm brown eyes and a face that looked like it had not smiled in a long time. He approached her table cautiously. "Elena Cross?" She tensed. "Who is asking?" "My name is Marcus Reed. I used to work for your husband." He sat down across from her without waiting for an invitation. "I have been trying to reach you for months." Elena remembered the name vaguely. Daniel's former CFO. There had been some kind of scandal, accusations of embezzlement. Daniel had fired him publicly, called him a thief and a traitor. "I know what you are thinking," Marcus said, "and I do not blame you." Daniel made sure everyone believed his version, but I was not the one stealing. I was the one who discovered what he was really doing. "And what was that?" Marcus looked around the cafeteria, then leaned closer. "Your father was an engineer, correct?" "Robert Mercer. He died about 12 years ago." Elena went still. "How do you know about my father?" "Because I found the patents." Marcus pulled a folder from his bag. "Your father developed technology that is now worth over $400 million. Technology that forms the backbone of Crosstech's entire product line." Elena shook her head. "That is not possible. My father never had any valuable patents. When he died, his estate was worth almost nothing." "That is what you were told," Marcus said. "But look." He opened the folder, revealing stacks of documents, technical diagrams, legal filings. "These are your father's original patents. And these," he pointed to a second stack, "are Crosstech's core technology filings. They are identical." "Oh, your husband built his empire on stolen intellectual property." "Your intellectual property." Elena stared at the papers. She recognized her father's handwriting in the margins. His careful notes, his signature. "How did Daniel get these?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. "That is the part you are not going to like. Just tell me." "Margaret Cross, Daniel's mother. She visited your father multiple times in the hospital before he died. There are records. I think she was the one who found the patents. I think she convinced Daniel to acquire them. Elena's mind raced. She remembered those final weeks, her father drifting in and out of consciousness, visitors she did not recognize, documents she had been too grief-stricken to examine carefully. She remembered signing things, estate papers, she had been told, just formalities. He stole from my dying father, Elena said slowly. They both did, Marcus said, and I can prove it. But there is a catch. What catch? The original files are encrypted. Your father was paranoid about security. I have the documents, but I cannot access the authentication files without the password. And that password died with him. Elena closed her eyes. Her father had been many things: quiet, brilliant, gentle, and yes, paranoid about his work. He had always been afraid someone would steal his ideas. It turned out he had been right. He used to say something to me every night, Elena said slowly, when he tucked me in, even when I was too old for it. He would whisper it in my ear. What did he say? My little starlight. Elena opened her eyes. Try that. Marcus pulled out a laptop. His fingers moved quickly over the keys. A password prompt appeared. He typed carefully. The screen changed. Files began populating. Hundreds of them. Technical specifications, legal documents, financial records. It worked, Marcus said. His voice hushed. Elena, this is everything. This is proof of fraud, theft, corporate espionage. This could bring down Daniel's entire empire. Elena looked at the screen. Somewhere in those files was justice for her father, for herself, for her daughter. What do we do now, she asked. Marcus closed the laptop. Now we build a case, quietly, carefully, and when we are ready, we bring him down. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena discovered strength she did not know she possessed. She and Marcus worked every night, organizing evidence, building timelines, documenting the fraud. Debbie found a small apartment that would take them without a credit check. DeWebb used her hospital connections to accelerate Elena's licensing review. Slowly, piece by piece, Elena began to assemble her case. Patricia filed a lawsuit against Crosstech for $400 million in stolen intellectual property. The story leaked to the press. Daniel's stock dropped 15% in a single day. For one beautiful moment, Elena allowed herself to hope. She was sitting in Debbie's new living room, reading the headline on her phone. Crosstech CEO accused of patent theft. Debbie brought her tea. How does it feel? Elena smiled. It feels like maybe, just maybe, things are going to be okay. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. She opened it, expecting more coverage of the lawsuit. Instead, she saw Victoria Ashford's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, standing at a podium. I am here today, Victoria said, to tell my story. I am pregnant with Daniel Cross's child, and 2 weeks ago, his estranged wife attacked me in a parking garage. I feared for my life. I feared for my baby's life. The video showed photos, bruises on Victoria's arms, a medical report, a police statement. Elena's blood turned to ice. I did not do this, she said. I have not seen her in months. This is a lie. Her phone rang. Patricia. Elena, Patricia said, her voice tight. Police are on their way to your location. They have a warrant for your arrest. The knock on the door came before she could respond. The handcuffs were cold against Elena's wrists. She was 7 months pregnant, and the officers had to adjust the cuffs to fit around her swollen belly. A small mercy in a sea of cruelty. Debbie was screaming at the police. She did not do this. She has been with me every day. She has not gone anywhere near that woman. Ma'am, you need to step back, one of the officers said. This is insane, Debbie shouted. Can you not see she is pregnant? She is about to have a baby. But the officers had their orders, and those orders came from people with more power than Debbie could fight. Elena was processed at the county jail. fingerprinted, photographed, made to change into an orange jumpsuit that barely fit over her stomach. She was placed in a holding cell with three other women who stared at her belly with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Bail was set at $500,000. Elena did not have $500, let alone $500,000. She spent 3 days in that cell. On the first day, she cried until she had no tears left. On the second day, she sat in silence, one hand on her stomach, whispering to her daughter, "I am sorry. I am so sorry." On the third day, Dr. Caroline Webb appeared. The guards led Elena to a visitation room, and there was Dr. Webb, looking exactly as composed as she had in the hospital. "I posted your bail," Dr. Webb said simply. Elena stared at her. "Why?" "Because I know what it is like to be a woman alone against a powerful man." Dr. Webb slid paperwork across the table. "Because I read about your father's patents, and I remember that technology. It was in a proposal cross-check made to this hospital 5 years ago. I thought it looked familiar then. Now I know why. I cannot pay you back," Elena said. "I am not asking you to." Dr. Webb stood. "What I am asking is that you do not give up. That man and his mother have been destroying people for decades. Someone needs to stop them. And I believe that someone is you." Elena was released that afternoon. Debbie was waiting outside the jail, Marcus beside her. "You look terrible," Debbie said, hugging her carefully. "I spent 3 days in jail while 7 months pregnant." Elena managed a weak smile. "I think I am allowed to look terrible." Marcus stepped forward, or Barra stepped forward. "While you were in there, I kept digging. The assault charges are fake. Victoria staged the whole thing." "I know," Elena said, "but proving it is another matter." "Actually," Marcus said, "it might be easier than we thought." He pulled out his phone. "I found security footage from a store across the street from where the supposed attack happened. Look at this." The video was grainy but clear enough. Victoria walking calmly, no signs of distress, meeting someone at a coffee shop nearby. Someone Elena recognized. Margaret Cross. "They were in on it together," Elena breathed. "And that is not all," Marcus said. "I got a DNA sample from Victoria. It was not easy, do not ask how, but I did. She is pregnant, all right, but not with Daniel's baby." "Whose is it?" "Grant Weston, Daniel's biggest competitor, head of Weston Technologies." Elena processed this information slowly. "Victoria is sleeping with Daniel's rival, has been for almost a year," Marcus confirmed. "She is playing both of them." Debbie whistled low. "Girl, this is better than my stories." Elena looked at the phone, at the frozen image of Margaret and Victoria conspiring together. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," Marcus said, "we finish building our case, and then we destroy them." The next 6 weeks became a masterclass in patience and precision. Elena learned that revenge was not a fire. It was ice. Cold, calculated, and infinitely more dangerous. She was confined to bed rest for most of this period, her body demanding recovery, while her mind refused to stop working. Debbie had converted the spare bedroom into a command center of sorts. A whiteboard covered one wall, filled with names, dates, and connections drawn in red marker. Stacks of documents covered every surface. 3 laptops ran constantly, each one tracking a different thread of the investigation. Marcus became her general in this quiet war. Every morning he arrived with coffee and updates. Every evening he left with new assignments and fresh determination. "We need to be smarter than them," Elena told him during one late-night strategy session. "Daniel has money, he has lawyers, he has connections, but he also has arrogance. And arrogance makes people sloppy." "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. "I am thinking that a man who steals from a dying father probably has other secrets. I am thinking that a woman who walks away from a call button probably has other victims. I am thinking that we need to find them all." Marcus nodded slowly. "You want to build a pattern. I want to build a prison," Elena said. "One they construct themselves brick by brick, with every terrible thing they have ever done." Debbie, who had been listening from the doorway, let out a low whistle. "Girl, that was cold. I love it." Elena almost smiled. I learned from the best. My mother used to say that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The strong ones are quiet. They are patient. They wait until they have all the cards before they play a single one. Your mama sounds like she was something special. Debbie said she was. Elena's hand moved to her stomach, to the daughter growing inside her. She worked 3 jobs to raise me alone. She never complained, never asked for help. She just kept going, day after day, until the cancer took her. Elena paused. I used to think that was strength. Now I know it was survival. Real strength is knowing when to ask for help, when to accept it, when to let people in. Marcus caught her eye. Is that what you are doing now? Letting people in? Elena held his gaze. I am trying. The investigation expanded in directions none of them had anticipated. Marcus traced the shell companies Daniel used to hide his assets. There were 17 of them, scattered across 4 countries, holding everything from real estate to cryptocurrency to offshore accounts the IRS knew nothing about. That alone is enough for federal charges, Marcus reported. Tax evasion, money laundering, securities fraud. If the SEC gets this information, Daniel is finished. Then we make sure they get it, Elena said. But not yet, not until we have everything. Dr. Webb contributed her own findings. She had been quietly investigating Crosstech's contracts with the hospital system, and what she found was damning. They overcharged on every single contract, she told Elena during one of her visits. Medical equipment that should have cost $50,000 was billed at $300,000. Software licenses that were supposed to be $5,000 a year were billed at $50,000. And the signatures approving these contracts? All from administrators who received generous consulting fees from Crosstech subsidiaries. Kickbacks, Elena said. Systematic corruption, Dr. Webb confirmed. This is not just Daniel. This is its entire network of people who profited from his crimes. And when this comes out, a lot of powerful people are going to fall. Good, Elena said. Let them fall. But the most devastating discovery came from an unexpected source. One evening, Marcus arrived with a woman Elena did not recognize. She was in her 50s, with tired eyes and trembling hands. Her name was Dorothy Chen, and she had worked as Margaret Cross's personal assistant for 15 years. She reached out to me, Marcus explained. She saw the news coverage and decided it was time to talk. Dorothy sat across from Elena, clutching a cup of tea like a lifeline. I know what she did, Dorothy said quietly. To your father, to others. I kept records. I had to, for my own protection. What kind of records? Elena asked. Dorothy opened a worn leather satchel and pulled out a thick folder. Margaret Cross has been destroying people for 40 years, Dorothy said. Your father was not the first. He was not even the 10th. She identifies targets, people with valuable assets, or ideas or connections. Then she systematically dismantles their lives until they have no choice but to give her what she wants. Elena took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were names, dates, photographs, a catalog of destruction spanning decades. There was a scientist in the 1990s, Dorothy continued. He had a patent for a medical device. Margaret wanted it. When he refused to sell, his wife suddenly received evidence of an affair he never had. Doctored photographs, fake hotel receipts. The wife filed for divorce and took everything, including the patent. Margaret bought it from her for pennies. Elena felt sick. And the scientist? He killed himself 3 months later, Dorothy said flatly. Margaret sent flowers to the funeral. There were more stories. A software developer whose visa was mysteriously revoked. A professor whose tenure was denied after anonymous complaints. A small business owner whose loans were suddenly called due. Pattern after pattern of destruction. Life after life ruined. Why are you telling me this now? Elena asked. Because I am dying, Dorothy said simply. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe less. And I am tired of carrying her secrets. She paused. Your father was a kind man, Mrs. Mercer. I met him once when Margaret first started circling him. He showed me pictures of you. He was so proud. He said you were going to change the world someday. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I think he was right, Dorothy said. And I think he would want you to have this. She pulled out one final item from her satchel, a handwritten letter, yellowed with age. He gave this to me the week before he died, Dorothy explained. He asked me to keep it safe. He said if anything happened to him, I should find a way to get it to you. I am sorry it took so long. Elena unfolded the letter with trembling hands. My dearest Starlight, it began. If you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. There are people who want what I have built, and I do not think I can stop them. But I need you to know the truth. The letter detailed everything. The patents, Margaret's visits, the pressure to sign documents he did not understand, his growing certainty that something terrible was coming. The final paragraph broke her heart. I have always believed that the truth has a way of finding the light, no matter how deeply it is buried. You are my light, Elena. You always have been. Whatever happens, remember that your father loved you more than anything in this world. And remember that justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. Be strong, my little Starlight. Be brave. And when the time comes, be merciless. Elena read the letter 3 times. Then she carefully folded it and pressed it against her heart. Thank you, she whispered to Dorothy. You have no idea what this means. Dorothy stood to leave, then paused at the door. Destroy her, she said. For all of us, for everyone she has ever hurt. Destroy her completely. I will, Elena promised. I will. After Dorothy left, Elena sat in silence for a long time. Marcus and Debbie waited, giving her space to process. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. We have enough, she said. More than enough. But I do not want to just beat them in court. I want to annihilate them. I want to make sure they never hurt anyone ever again. I want the whole world to see who they really are. So what is the plan? Debbie asked. Elena smiled. It was not a warm smile. We are going to give them exactly what they deserve, and we are going to do it in a way they will never see coming. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Phase 1 involved leaking the patent theft story to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Not all of it, just enough to create doubt, to start the questions, to make investors nervous. Phase 2 involved an anonymous tip to the SEC about Crosstech's offshore accounts. Again, not everything, just enough to trigger an investigation. Phase 3 involved Dorothy's records being delivered to the FBI's white-collar crime division. The pattern of destruction, the victims, the decades of fraud, and Phase 4, the killing blow, would happen in the courtroom, in front of witnesses, on the record, where Daniel and Margaret would be forced to answer for everything they had done. But first, Elena had to survive what came next, because Victoria Ashford was about to play her final card. The contractions started at 3:17 in the morning on a Wednesday in late October. Elena woke to a pain that felt like lightning striking her spine. She lay still for a moment, breathing through it, counting the seconds, trying to determine if this was real or just another false alarm. Then her water broke, and she knew. "Debbie!" Elena called out, her voice surprisingly calm. "It is time." The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Debbie called Marcus. Marcus called Dr. Webb. Dr. Webb called the hospital to prepare. Elena focused on breathing, on staying calm, on the tiny life inside her that was finally ready to meet the world. The drive to the hospital took forever and no time at all. Elena gripped the door handle through each contraction, watching the street lights blur past, thinking about all the ways her life had changed in the past several months. She had lost so well: her marriage, her home, her bawa, her twin, her faith in the people she had trusted. But she had gained something too. Strength she did not know she possessed. Friends who had become family. Purpose that extended beyond her own survival. And now, finally, she was about to meet her daughter. Dr. Webb was waiting at the hospital entrance with a wheelchair and a reassuring smile. "How are we doing?" she asked, helping Elena into the chair. "I'm about to push a human being out of my body," Elena said through gritted teeth. "How do you think I am doing?" Dr. Webb laughed. "That is the spirit. Let us go have a baby." The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that came in waves, each one worse than the last. 14 hours of breathing exercises and ice chips and Debbie holding her hand so tight it left bruises. 14 hours of fighting for the life she had almost lost. At some point during hour 10, when the pain was so intense Elena could barely think, Debbie leaned close to her ear. You remember what you told me, Debbie whispered, about your mother, about how she never gave up, no matter how hard things got? Elena nodded, unable to speak. You are just like her, Debbie said. Stronger, maybe, because she faced her battles alone. And you have an army. You have me and Marcus and Dr. Webb and all the people who believe in you. You are not alone, Elena. You have never been alone. Tears streamed down Elena's face, not from the pain, but from something else, something that felt like hope. I am so tired, she whispered. I know, but you are almost there. Just a little more. Just a little more and you will meet your daughter. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about her father who had believed in her until his last breath. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself to death so Elena could have a better life. She thought about the twin she had lost, the child who would never know the world. And she thought about the daughter she was about to hold. The reason all of this had been worth fighting for. Okay, Elena said, opening her eyes. Let us finish this. Hope Mercer came into the world at 5:47 in the evening. Screaming with lungs that seemed too powerful for such a tiny body, Dr. Webb lifted her up, and Elena saw her daughter for the first time. Red-faced and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. She is beautiful, Dr. Webb said, placing the baby on Elena's chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the loudest cry I have heard in years. She is perfect, Elena. Elena could not speak. She could only hold her daughter and cry and marvel at the impossible miracle of life. Hope, she whispered. Your name is Hope. The baby's crying stopped. Her tiny eyes opened, unfocused but somehow seeing, and for one perfect moment, the rest of the world did not exist. There was only this, a mother and her daughter, a beginning. The perfection lasted exactly 47 hours. Elena was recovering in her hospital room, Hope sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed, when the door opened and her world shattered once again. A woman in a gray suit entered first, then 2 police officers, then a man Elena recognized as one of Daniel's lawyers. Mrs. Mercer, the woman in gray said, my name is Sandra Collins. I am with Child Protective Services. Elena's blood turned to ice. We have a court order, Sandra continued, holding out a document, for emergency custody evaluation of your daughter. No. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. No, you cannot do this. I understand this is difficult, Sandra said, her tone professionally sympathetic. But the order has been signed by a judge. Based on your recent arrest and the ongoing custody dispute, Mr. Cross has been granted temporary emergency custody pending a full hearing. My arrest was dismissed. The charges were dropped. The order has already been issued. Sandra set the document on the bed. You have 24 hours to surrender the child. Elena stared at the paper. The words blurred together. She could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything except reach for her daughter and hold her close. Please, Elena said, please do not do this. She is 2 days old. She needs her mother. I am sorry, Sandra said, and she did sound sorry, in the way people sound sorry when they are about to do something terrible anyway. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Judge Patricia Holloway presiding. They left. Elena sat alone in her hospital room, holding her sleeping daughter, feeling the walls close in around her. This is it, she thought. This is how I lose everything. But then hope stirred. Her tiny hand found Elena's finger and wrapped around it, holding on with surprising strength. And something shifted inside Elena. No, she said out loud, not this time. She reached for her phone and called Marcus. They are trying to take Hope, she said. Emergency custody hearing tomorrow morning. I need everything we have. Every document. Every piece of evidence. Everything. I will be there in an hour, Marcus said. Then she called Patricia. We need to be ready, Elena said. This is our one shot. We will be ready, Patricia promised. Then she called Dr. Webb. I need a favor, Elena said. Name it, Dr. Webb replied. Finally, she called Debbie. I need you here, Elena said, her voice breaking for the first time. I cannot do this alone. How can... Debbie's response was immediate. I am already on my way. Elena hung up the phone and looked at her daughter. They think I am weak, she whispered. They think I am broken. They think they can take you away from me because I have nothing left to fight with. Hope's eyes opened, unfocused but attentive, listening. But they are wrong, Elena continued. They have no idea what I am capable of. They have no idea what a mother will do to protect her child. She kissed her daughter's forehead. Tomorrow, she said, tomorrow we end this. The courtroom was smaller than Elena expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of uncomfortable benches. It looked like any government building, ordinary and tired and completely unaware of the drama about to unfold within its walls. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia on one side and Marcus on the other. She wore a simple navy dress that Dr. Webb had brought to the hospital. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was pale but composed. Hope was in a private room nearby, being monitored by nurses who had volunteered their time. Dr. Webb was with her. Debbie was with her. An army of protection for one tiny girl. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his legal team, 4 lawyers in expensive suits, surrounding him like a wall of arrogance. He looked confident, relaxed even, as if this were just another business meeting he was destined to win. Margaret Cross sat in the gallery behind him, silver hair perfectly styled, pearl earrings catching the light. Her expression was one of mild boredom, as if watching someone else's tragedy unfold was merely an inconvenience in her busy schedule. Victoria Ashford sat 2 rows back, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her face carefully arranged into an expression of innocent concern. "All rise," the bailiff called. "Court is now in session." The Honorable Patricia Holloway presiding. Judge Holloway entered. She was in her early 60s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had seen every trick lawyers could devise and was impressed by none of them. "This is an emergency custody hearing," she said, reviewing her notes. "Mr. Cross is seeking temporary custody of the minor child, Hope Mercer Cross, based on allegations of maternal unfitness. Is that correct?" Daniel's lead attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe the child is in immediate danger in her mother's care." "And Ms. Mercer," Judge Holloway turned to Elena, "you dispute these allegations?" Elena stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice was steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I dispute every single one. And I intend to prove that Mr. Cross and his mother are not only unfit guardians, but criminals who have spent decades destroying innocent lives." The gallery murmured. Daniel's confident expression flickered. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Those are serious allegations, Ms. Mercer. I have serious evidence, Your Honor." "Very well." She settled back in her chair. "Let us proceed. Mr. Cross, you may present your case." Daniel's lawyers went first. They were smooth, professional, relentless. They talked about Elena's arrest for assault, carefully omitting that the charges had been dismissed. They presented the therapy notes claiming she was mentally unstable. They painted a picture of a woman spiraling out of control, a danger to herself and others. "Your Honor," the lead attorney concluded, "our client simply wants what is best for his daughter. A stable home, proper care, protection from a mother who has demonstrated repeated patterns of erratic behavior." Elena listened to every word. She did not react. She did not interrupt. She simply waited. When it was her turn, Patricia stood. "Your Honor, before we present our case, we need to address the credibility of the witnesses and evidence presented by Mr. Cross's team." "Objection," Daniel's lawyer said. "This is a custody hearing, not a character trial." "Your Honor," Patricia continued, "the evidence we are about to present is directly relevant to whether Mr. Cross and his family are fit to care for any child." "I ask for the court's patience." Judge Holloway considered this. "I will allow it. But stay focused, counselor." "Thank you, Your Honor." Patricia clicked a remote, and the courtroom screen lit up. What followed was a systematic destruction of everything Daniel Cross had built. First came the patent evidence. Side-by-side comparisons of Robert Mercer's original work and Crosstech's core technology. Expert testimony establishing that the designs were identical. Financial records showing how Daniel had acquired the patents through fraud while Robert lay dying in a hospital bed. Second came the financial crimes. Shell company after shell company mapped out in devastating detail. Offshore accounts, tax evasion, money laundering. A web of deception spanning 4 countries and 2 decades. Third came Dorothy Chen's records. The pattern of destruction, victim after victim, life after life ruined by Margaret Cross's systematic predation. The courtroom was silent. Even Daniel's lawyers had stopped objecting. But Patricia was not finished. Your Honor, she said, we would now like to present evidence regarding the assault charges that led to Mrs. Mercer's arrest. Evidence that proves those charges were fabricated. The screen changed to security footage. A coffee shop across the street from where the alleged assault occurred. The timestamp showed 1 hour before Victoria claimed to have been attacked. There was Victoria sitting at a table, looking completely uninjured, and sitting across from her was Margaret Cross. They talked for 37 minutes. At one point, Margaret handed Victoria an envelope. At another point, Victoria showed Margaret her phone and both women smiled. Objection, Daniel's lawyer finally managed. This proves nothing. Your Honor, Patricia said, we also have phone records showing 17 calls between Victoria Ashford and Margaret Cross in the week leading up to the alleged assault. And we have a witness. She turned to the gallery. We call Victoria Ashford to the stand. Victoria's face went pale. She looked at Daniel, at Margaret, at the exit, but there was nowhere to run. She walked to the witness stand like a woman walking to her execution. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. Ms. Ashford, is it true that you staged the assault that led to Mrs. Mercer's arrest? I do not know what you're talking about. Patricia held up the security footage still. Is that you meeting with Margaret Cross 1 hour before you claimed to be attacked? Victoria's hands trembled. We were just having coffee. And the envelope she handed you? It was nothing. Was it nothing, or was it payment for your cooperation? I want a lawyer. You are under oath, Miss Ashford. Patricia's voice hardened. Did you fabricate the assault charges against Elena Mercer? Victoria looked at Daniel. He would not meet her eyes. She looked at Margaret. Margaret's expression was ice cold. In that moment, Victoria Ashford made a choice. The same choice rats have made for centuries when the ship starts sinking. Yes, she whispered. The courtroom erupted. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order! Order in this court! Patricia pressed forward. Who asked you to do this? Victoria pointed at Margaret. She did. She said if I helped her, she would make sure I was taken care of. She said Daniel would never find out about... She stopped. About what? Patricia prompted. Victoria's face crumpled. About the baby. It is not Daniel's. It is Grant Weston's. Margaret knew. She has been blackmailing me for months. Daniel shot to his feet. What? Sit down, Mr. Cross, Judge Holloway commanded. But Daniel was not listening. He was staring at Victoria with an expression of pure shock. You have been sleeping with Grant Weston? For almost a year, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. Margaret found out. She said if I did not help her destroy Elena, she would tell you. She would tell everyone. The gallery was in chaos. Reporters were scribbling frantically. Daniel's lawyers were huddled in emergency conference. Margaret Cross sat frozen, her composure finally cracking. But Patricia was not finished. One more piece of evidence, Your Honor, she said. The most important one. The screen changed again. This time it showed hospital security footage. Old and grainy, but clear enough. Room 314. The timestamp showed a date 12 years ago. Margaret Cross entered the room at 8:14 in the evening. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then Margaret emerged, walking quickly, her face expressionless. 1 minute later, the call button in room 314 lit up. Margaret kept walking, past the nurse's station, toward the elevator. She did not look back. Elena's voice cut through the silence. That was my father's room, she said. He was dying, and she walked away. Judge Holloway stared at the screen. Her face had gone pale. We have testimony from nurses on duty that night, Patricia said. Robert Mercer told them he was afraid someone was going to steal his work. He wanted to change his will. He pressed that call button because he was having a cardiac event. By the time anyone reached him, it was too late. She turned to face Margaret Cross directly, and Margaret Cross watched it happen. She let him die, because dead men cannot protect their patents. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Judge Holloway spoke. Bailiff, take Margaret Cross into custody. 2 officers moved toward the gallery. Margaret stood, her face contorted with rage. "You cannot do this," she hissed. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you? I know exactly who you are," Judge Holloway said. "That is the problem." As Margaret was handcuffed and led away, she screamed at Daniel, "This is your fault, all of it. If you had just handled your wife properly, none of this would have happened. You are weak, Daniel. You have always been weak." Daniel stared at his mother being dragged from the courtroom. He looked at Victoria, still crying on the witness stand. He looked at Elena, sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table, her face serene, and he understood, finally and completely, that he had lost. Judge Holloway cleared her throat. "Given the evidence presented today, I am denying Mr. Cross's petition for emergency custody. The child remains with her mother." She paused. "Furthermore, I am referring all evidence presented in this hearing to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. And I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Mr. Cross or any member of his family from approaching Mrs. Mercer or her daughter." She looked at Elena. "Mrs. Mercer, you and your daughter are free to go." Elena stood. Her legs were steady now. "Thank you, Your Honor." She walked out of the courtroom without looking at Daniel. She did not need to. She had already won. The collapse of Daniel Cross happened faster than anyone expected. But for Elena, watching it unfold was like watching a building demolition in slow motion. Every falling beam, every shattering window, every cloud of dust was a vindication of everything she had survived. The SEC investigation was announced 3 days after the hearing. Federal agents descended on Crosstech headquarters with warrants and boxes. Employees were interviewed. Computers were seized. The empire Daniel had built on stolen foundations began to crumble. His stock dropped 60% in a single week. Board members resigned one after another, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Investors filed lawsuits. Partners severed ties. The Crosstech logo, which had once glowed from billboards across the city, became a symbol of fraud and failure. Daniel tried to fight back. He gave interviews claiming he was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. He hired crisis managers and public relations experts. He threatened lawsuits against anyone who spoke against him. But the evidence was too overwhelming. And with each new revelation, more people came forward. Former employees testified about intellectual property theft they had witnessed. Former partners revealed contracts that had been based on stolen technology. Former victims of Margaret Cross came forward with their own stories of destruction. The Wall Street Journal ran a 12-part series called The Cross Conspiracy. It detailed 40 years of fraud, theft, intimidation, and corruption. It named names, it showed receipts, it left no room for doubt. By the end of the month, Daniel Cross was a pariah. His friends stopped calling. His country club revoked his membership. His favorite restaurant refused his reservation. And then the criminal charges came. The federal indictment was 47 pages long. Securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy. 27 counts in total, each one carrying years in prison. Daniel's passport was confiscated. His assets were frozen. The penthouse where Elena had once lived was seized as part of the investigation. He was photographed leaving the federal courthouse in handcuffs. The image ran on every news site, every newspaper, every television channel. Billionaire CEO Daniel Cross arrested on federal charges. Elena saw the headline while feeding Hope in their small apartment. She looked at the photograph of Daniel, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, and felt something unexpected. Not joy, not triumph, not even satisfaction, just relief. The kind of relief that comes when a long illness finally breaks. "It is really over," she said to Hope. "It is really finally over." Hope gurgled in response, milk dribbling down her chin. Elena laughed. "You are absolutely right. It is time for lunch." Margaret Cross's fall was even more spectacular. The charges against her were filed separately. Negligent homicide, fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering. The prosecutor described her as the architect of a criminal enterprise spanning 4 decades. Her bail hearing became a circus. Reporters packed the courtroom. Cameras waited outside. The whole world wanted to see the downfall of the woman who had destroyed so many lives. Margaret entered the courtroom in prison orange. Her silver hair was unkempt. Her face, without makeup, looked decades older than her years. She tried to maintain her composure, tried to project the same icy superiority that had intimidated people for so long. But when the judge set her bail at $5 million, something cracked. "This is outrageous," Margaret spat. "I am not a flight risk. I have deep roots in this community. I have contributed millions to charitable causes. I deserve to be released on my own recognizance." The judge, a young woman who clearly had not gotten the memo about showing deference to the wealthy, looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Mrs. Cross," she said, "you are charged with letting a man die so you could steal his life's work. You are charged with spending 40 years systematically destroying innocent people. You are charged with framing an innocent woman and trying to steal her child." She paused. "I am not going to release you on your own recognizance. I am going to set bail at $5 million, and I am going to suggest that you use your time in custody to reflect on the harm you have caused." Margaret's lawyer tried to intervene. "Your Honor, my client is 78 years old. She poses no threat to society." The judge cut him off. "Your client has been threatening society for 78 years. It is time for that to stop." Margaret was led away in handcuffs. As she passed the gallery, she caught sight of Elena, who had come to watch. Their eyes met. Elena expected to see hatred, rage, the promise of revenge. Instead, she saw something she had never seen in Margaret Cross before. Fear. Elena held her gaze. She did not speak. She did not gloat. She simply watched the woman who had killed her father being led away to a cell, and then she turned and walked out of the courthouse, into the sunlight, into the rest of her life. Victoria Ashford's fall was the quietest of the three. She cut a deal with prosecutors, trading her testimony for reduced charges. She admitted to staging the assault. She admitted to conspiring with Margaret. She admitted to everything. In exchange, she received 2 years of probation and community service. But her real punishment was social. Grant Weston, the father of her child, wanted nothing to do with her. When she tried to contact him, his lawyer sent a cease and desist letter. He released a statement saying he had been deceived and manipulated, and that he would be seeking sole custody of the child. Daniel, facing his own legal troubles, had no time or energy for a woman who had betrayed him, and the influencer lifestyle Victoria had cultivated so carefully collapsed overnight. Brands canceled contracts. Followers abandoned her. Comments turned vicious. She gave one final interview to a tabloid magazine, trying to paint herself as a victim. "I was manipulated by Margaret Cross," she claimed, tears streaming down her professionally made-up face. "I was scared. I did not know what else to do." No one believed her. She disappeared into obscurity, which was perhaps the worst punishment for someone who had craved attention above all else. A single mother with a damaged reputation, raising a child whose father did not want her. Elena felt no sympathy. Some people earned their consequences. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when Daniel Cross stood in federal court to receive his sentence. Elena attended the hearing. She sat in the front row of the gallery, Hope sleeping peacefully in a carrier beside her. Daniel looked nothing like the man she had married. He had lost weight. His hair was graying. His expensive suit had been replaced by prison orange. He looked small, ordinary, broken. The judge, an older man with a reputation for harsh sentences, reviewed the case file with evident disgust. "Mr. Cross," he said, "you were given every advantage in life: wealth, education, opportunity, and you used those advantages to steal from others, to destroy careers, to ruin lives, to build an empire on a foundation of fraud." He paused. "Your father-in-law trusted you. You stole his work while he was dying and used it to make yourself rich. Your wife trusted you. You betrayed her, framed her, and tried to steal her child. Countless others trusted you. You destroyed them all." The courtroom was silent. "I have read the victim impact statements," the judge continued. "I have read about the scientist who killed himself after your mother destroyed his marriage. I have read about the families who lost everything because of your financial schemes. I have read about the employees who were blacklisted when they tried to speak up." He looked at Daniel. "You have caused incalculable harm, Mr. Cross, and now you will face the consequences." The sentence was 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 8. Daniel's face went white. "Your Honor," his lawyer stammered, "this is excessive. My client is a first-time offender. He has expressed remorse." Your client has expressed nothing but contempt for this court and his victims, the judge interrupted. The sentence stands. As Daniel was led away in handcuffs, he looked at Elena for the first time. Their eyes met. Elena saw something in his face that she had never seen before. Not regret, exactly. Not apology. Recognition. He finally understood what he had lost, what he had thrown away, what he could never get back. Elena held his gaze for one long moment. Then she turned to Hope, adjusting the blanket around her sleeping daughter. When she looked up again, Daniel was gone. That night, Elena sat in her apartment with Debbie and Marcus, drinking champagne and watching the news coverage of Daniel's sentencing. 12 years, Debbie said, shaking her head. That man is going to be 73 when he gets out. No money, no power, no nothing. He will have plenty of time to think about what he did, Marcus said. Elena was quiet, watching Hope sleep in her crib. How do you feel? Marcus asked gently. Elena considered the question. She thought about everything she had survived. The betrayal, the loss, the moments when giving up had seemed like the only option. I feel, she said, slowly, like I can finally breathe. Debbie raised her glass. To breathing. Marcus raised his. To justice. Elena raised hers. To hope. They drank together, three people who had become a family through circumstance and choice. Outside, the city sparkled with lights. Inside, a baby slept peacefully, dreaming whatever newborns dream. And in a federal prison 300 miles away, Daniel Cross lay on a narrow bed in a small cell, staring at the ceiling, finally understanding the cost of everything he had done. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Elena Mercer stood in the lobby of St. Mary's Hospital with her daughter in her arms. The lobby sparkled with holiday decorations. Volunteers hummed carols near a towering Christmas tree. Nurses exchanged gifts at the reception desk, and families gathered in small clusters, their faces reflecting the hope and fear that always accompanied hospital visits. Elena moved through it all like a woman transformed. She wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that whispered against her skin. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Diamond studs, a gift from herself to celebrate the patent settlement, caught the light with each step. But her most precious accessory was the child in her arms. Hope, now 1 year old, with curious eyes that took in everything and a smile that could melt the coldest heart. They were here for the dedication ceremony. The Robert Mercer Center for Children occupied the entire new wing of the hospital. State-of-the-art equipment, the latest technology, the best staff money could hire. Elena had donated $40 million to build it, but the money meant nothing compared to what it represented. Her father's legacy, finally honored. His work, finally recognized. His memory, finally given the home it deserved. Dr. Webb met her at the entrance to the new wing, her face glowing with pride. "It is beautiful," Dr. Webb said. "Your father would be so proud." Elena looked at the brass plaque beside the entrance. The Robert Mercer Center for Children. Dedicated to a man who believed that every child deserves a chance. He always wanted to help children, Elena said softly. That was what all his work was about, making things better for the next generation. And now it will, Webb said, for generations to come. The ceremony was brief but moving. Elena spoke about her father, about his kindness, his brilliance, his belief that one person could make a difference. She did not speak about Daniel, did not mention Margaret, did not waste a single word on the people who had tried to destroy her. They did not deserve to be part of this moment. When she finished, the gathered crowd applauded. Doctors and nurses who had known her when she was just a pediatric nurse. Patients and families who had benefited from the foundation's work. Friends who had stood by her through the darkest times. Marcus stood near the back, watching her with an expression of quiet pride. Debbie stood near the front, openly crying and not caring who saw. And Hope, oblivious to the significance of the moment, played with a stuffed rabbit someone had given her, giggling every time she squeezed its ear. After the ceremony, Elena took one final walk through the new wing. She passed rooms filled with children, some sleeping, some playing, some hooked up to machines that might save their lives. In one room, a little girl with no hair was drawing pictures on a tablet. She looked up as Elena passed and smiled. Elena smiled back. This is what it was all for, she thought. Not the money, not the revenge, not even the justice. This, life. Hope. The chance to make something beautiful from something terrible. She was on her way out when she saw him. Daniel Cross stood near the lobby entrance, thinner than she remembered, wearing a visitor's badge and holding a briefcase that looked like it belonged to a public defender. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. Elena noticed the changes immediately. The weight he had lost, the gray in his hair, the defeated slump of his shoulders. He was out on some kind of legal technicality, she had heard. Something about overcrowding at the federal facility. But the charges remained. The civil cases remained. The destruction of everything he had built remained. He was a shadow of the man she had married. And standing there, seeing him for the first time in over a year, Elena felt something unexpected. Nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. He was a chapter that had ended, a story that was over, a part of her life that had no power over her anymore. Daniel opened his mouth to speak. To say what, she would never know. Because Elena did not wait to hear it. She adjusted Hope on her hip, smiled at the volunteers singing carols by the Christmas tree, and walked past Daniel Cross as if he were a stranger. Which in every way that mattered, he now was. Outside, the snow was falling, softly, blanketing the city in white. Marcus was waiting by the car. When he saw her face, he smiled. "How do you feel?" Elena looked back at the hospital, at the new wing bearing her father's name, at the windows glowing with warmth and light. Then she looked at her daughter, at the man beside her, at the future stretching out before them like a gift. "I feel," she said, "free." Marcus took her hand, she let him, and behind them, through the glass doors of the hospital lobby, Daniel Cross stood frozen, watching, understanding, finally and forever, what he had lost. They say the best revenge is living well. But as Elena Mercer had learned, that was not quite right. The best revenge was living free. Building a life so full of joy that you forgot to check if your enemies were watching. That was what Elena had done. That was what she would continue to do. For her father, for her daughter, for herself. She strapped Hope into the car seat, tucking the blanket around her tiny body. "Mama," Hope said, one of her first words. Elena kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. Mama's here. Mama is always going to be here." She climbed into the passenger seat. Marcus started the car. "Where to?" he asked. Elena smiled. "Home." They drove away through the snow-covered streets, past houses glowing with holiday lights, past families gathered around dinner tables, past all the small moments of joy that made up a life. In the rearview mirror, the hospital grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared, and Elena Mercer did not look back. She had spent too many years looking back. Now she only looked forward, to tomorrow, to next year, to all the years to come, to hope.